Friends, Bison, country folk, welcome. This is the very first of these conversations with people who tend to the soul of the United States. And I'm really excited to be here today with Reggie Marra, who is the author of Healing America's Narratives, The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, um, among many other things. He is a poet, he's a teacher, uh, he's, he's a hooper, he's
I
Uh,
was a hooper.
yeah, he was a hooper. He's a New Yorker. He's many, 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 many things. But I'm delighted to have him here because in the book that I'm, nurturing, Bison Medicine, Reggie's book deeply informed how I understand the soul and the shadows of the United States. And who better to speak to that than the man himself? So welcome, Reggie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brandon. It's my pleasure, as you know. Yeah.
um, so So this is different than anything else people are going to, experience about the soul of the nation or a book or whatever. I think for us to tend to the soul of the nation, we probably need to tend to our own souls. Um, and so why don't we connect on that level? How's your soul today?
Yeah, it's generally, I'm going to just be kind of generic at first. It's generally good. It has some concerns. Um, but I want to just get really clear because you and I have some similar background with regard to what we mean by soul.
Hmm.
But I want to be clear to what I mean by it because I was raised Catholic in New York,
Please.
and it was, the soul was this thing that would rise up after my body died. And while I was living, it could get a black mark if I committed a sin. So I'm not talking about that. Um, but my favorite iteration of the word soul is comes from Bill Plotkin, and he refers to soul as one's place in the world, and more specifically, one's unique ecological niche. In other words, each of us, all things, sentient and non-sentient, have a place in the world, what they're here to do. Different from a job, different from a job description, but it's a unique place.
Hmm.
And it took I misunderstood that for some time, but once I understood what my unique place, my ecological niche was, then I realized all of my jobs and my activities were simply delivery systems for it. So again, I want to credit Bill Plotkin for that language. But my soul is generally good because I get up every day and do what I'm called to do. Like I feel like I'm home when I'm working. And that's a really good feeling, as you know. Yeah. So my soul is pretty good. It has some concerns. It occasionally worries that no matter how hard I work and no matter how good my work is, that I still see things falling apart around me. And so that's I'm also, but I also understand that I can't fix the universe, at least not today. It might take another week. So, so that's how my soul is. How about yours?
Um, and thank you for that Plotkin framing because that very much resonates for me as well. Huge high esteem for his work as well. Um, yeah, it's very similar. Like in general, great. Like that I and you and many other folks get to like follow it, but the heed its dictate like every day is awesome. Like it's a privilege and something that when I sit in front of my altar, I'm like, gosh, I get so lucky. Like, how did I not accidentally wind up with this you know, $15,000 mortgage and like seven hungry mouths that I would never be able to tend to my own soul. Like, oh, I'm so lucky. Um, Now that being said, I wake up and I like you feel very responsible for the 330 million mouths that we share this piece of Turtle Island with. But today, pretty good. As I shared with you before we hit record, just got to lead some folks on some purpose work, some leaders, so they could lead more from the heart, soulfully. Um, and yeah, excited. Uh, like today is just a day of like reading and writing, and so like there's like a lot of delight like
Yeah.
anticipatory delight in a sense. I'm in with that.
Yeah. Okay, and I love that you use the word delight. There's a great line from a poem from the late Jack Gilbert, who was one of the greatest, I think, uh, 20th into the 21st century American poets. Um, and the title of the poem is A Brief for the Defense.
Hmm.
And in it, he just begins with some really difficult images or from around the world to look at. And then he says, but we must risk delight. So amid the mess, and it's great that he used the verb risk. He says, but through all of it, we must risk delight. So I'm just really glad that you used that word so I could show off and cite a poem. Not my own poem. That was Jack Gilbert's poem.
Well, amen. You know,
Yeah.
we have to. I mean, like, if we're being honest, things are going to get worse before they're going to get better generally. So we've got to harvest the delight coins as we find them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so let's dive in, Reggie. Invite you to answer the question or riff. Uh, how do you tend to the soul of the United States?
Yeah. So I've done it in different, I'll use the word delivery systems. I've done it in different iterations throughout my life as a high school teacher, as a high school basketball coach. You can tell how old we are because you refer to us as hoopers, and nowadays we're ballers.
Well,
Well, that's what the language is now. So I have to stay up with that. But as a classroom teacher, as a writer, as a poet, but most recently, and for whatever reasons I don't fully understand, I became increasingly more interested in history. Wasn't my major in undergraduate or graduate school. Um, as I began to see the country unfolding. So I attempt to tend to the soul of the country by employing all of the tools that I've been blessed to have or learn, um, which includes integral theory and practice, based on not just Ken Wilber's work, but some of that there. And to more specifically to recognize, to see what's going on in the country that I feel is inconsistent with the promise of the country. Um, and I then to just really zero in on the shadow of the country, those aspects of our 248, not quite 248-year experiment, um, that are denied, that tens of millions of Americans want to make believe aren't true, even to the point of deciding what can and can't be taught in schools, um, among other things. So what I do then is through writing and through teaching and through some coaching as well, but most of it is through writing and teaching, is share with people. I like to refer to the people who will read what I write or who will take a class that I'm teaching as the willing, because I've realized that it's a lot harder work to do to try to convince the unwilling.
Mhm.
So I'm here, I'm there. Show up if you want to, get involved with this stuff. If not, that's okay too. Um, but to try to point out the connected dots among many narratives in this country, among much that's denied in this country, among who has benefited the most, who has benefited the least, and there's a long continuum there. It's not this group and that group. There are many groups, and to share that in a way that is committed to absolute truth and fact. In other words, if I'm going to say it out loud or I'm going to write it in a book, it has to be irrefutable. And if it's something that I'm not sure about, I say that is my opinion, or that I don't know for sure about this yet, but here are my thoughts. So really to tease it apart, because I don't want to waste time debating facts with people. That to me is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So to put it out there in a gentle, non-threatening way that's both honest, open for conversation, um, and well informed. Because as I got older, I realized that the vast majority of the people in the world and in the country aren't as fortunate as I or as foolish as I to spend more time learning and trying to develop myself and less time trying to make money. And that's a mixed blessing. So I'm neither bragging nor complaining about
Mhm.
it, but it's true.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a long-winded response to the question, but that's pretty much how I go about tending to the soul of the nation, which feels grandiose in one way, but I do it one or depending on or 10 or 15 or 30 souls at a time when
Mhm.
I'm teaching.
Yeah.
And I don't know the number of people who would have read the book. Um, I don't think it's I don't think it's in the tens of millions.
Not yet. Not
No,
yet.
not yet. Yeah. So
Um, so, I mean, I love how you answer that because I mean, for me, like reading your book and going through it a couple times now, like it felt like there was like this beacon of light that you put on the shadow in like several different spots. Um, and for me, I was like, oh, thank God. I was like, you know, because when I juxtapose it with some of the other stuff about our founding and our
mm,
documents and like we're shining the light on the aspiration, but who gives a shit? Because like nobody, very few people even know what that is, but like nobody's ever seen that lived,
right.
and I think it's because that folks haven't looked at why it's not so, and I think that's what I experience, healing America's narratives to do. It's like this is where we're out of step. This is this
Mm,
is the work left to be done to fulfill on the aspirations.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm curious, like you've had this beautiful career tending to the soul of those you guide, lead, teach, write for, the willing. Like, how did this book come to be? What were the obsessions, like the questions that guided you to like say, like, you know what, I'm going to beat myself up for years to make this thing a reality so I can give it to others. Like how did this journey start?
Yeah, so the general answer to that is how it started was whatever it was that led me to be a teacher and want to write back when I was in my teens and 20s.
Mhm.
That was my inclination. I didn't want to, be a scientist or a corporate person or anything. I wanted to teach and write. I didn't know exactly what or why. That's what I was, drawn towards. That's the general response. I wanted to understand more and more. Um, that's what I've mentioned Bill Plotkin and Ken Wilber, and those were two important teachers. I mean, for me, Plotkin in person over a period of various trainings, and Wilber mostly through his books, although I have met him. But more immediately, um, as I became more interested in history over the last, I'll say, 20 to 25 years, most immediately, because I grew up in Yonkers, New York. I lived there and in New Rochelle, New York for about 43 years before I moved to Connecticut. But I went to undergraduate school at St. John's in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, and graduate school in Iona, which is now a university in New Rochelle. So I was first introduced to the concept of Donald Trump either when I was just out of high school or I was just out of college. I forget exactly, but it was in the late 70s
Mhm.
and into the early 80s. And he was pretty much my experience of him back then. He was this heir to his father's fortune, and he had an air of arrogance about him, and he seemed like a rich buffoon to me. I'm not talking about him, out of school today. That was my first impression of him, and he never did anything publicly that led me away from it. So when he became the Republican candidate for the 2016 presidential election, I was like a lot of people, that can't be allowed to happen. So I hate to say it, but I wrote two essays, 2016 and 2018, one before he was elected and one after, just saying this guy embodies all the things that are wrong with America. That was how it began. And once he was in the White House and I realized I had enough material for a book, I said, I have to really educate myself more. So I need to learn the history of what I call the three subjugations, three primary subjugations: women, Native Americans, African Americans, that this country was built on. There are other subjugations subsequently, but those are the three foundational ones. So it was his rising to power. He could be the head of Trump organization all he wants. but he had never done anything as an act of service that was on the public record anywhere. He was only building his own brand. That's all he ever seemed to do. He was involved in over 3,500 lawsuits before he ran for president. That was his way of being in the world, suing and being sued. Um, so that led me to say, okay, I need to be able to point to the shadow of this country and just make it sure that it's clear the book is not about him. There's a chapter that addresses him as the embodiment of shadow, but that's one of 12 chapters. And to point to what's really going on here and how these traits of shadow have, I can point to them from the 1700s forward.
Hmm.
And I challenge scholars anywhere, and I'm not an academic, to refute any of it. I mean, and then let me just say this: the 9 traits of shadow, the things that we deny in this country, are ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. Those are the 9. There may be more, but those are the 9 that I knew I could point to, whether it was with women, Native Americans, African Americans, the Vietnam War, and other historical artifacts. That the shadow elements are just there. We make believe they're not true. Um, so, so that's generally, I'm an educator and a writer, I think by birth. And more specifically, I was really concerned when someone like Donald Trump rose toward the presidency, and what he's doing now. Just, I hate to say it, I wish I had been wrong, but his behavior and those who still like him um, give my work more credibility. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Um, by the way, I want to challenge you a little bit on like not being an academic. You might be, your identity might be more poetry or writing, but you're studying and proving that something that hasn't yet been done by other folks who call themselves academics. So I think you're an academic, maybe with that without the whatever the
I appreciate that. No, what I mean was
difficulty.
I don't make my
Yeah,
living in
yeah,
academia per se. I'm not
yeah,
getting a salary to teach at a university level.
yeah.
Or do so. Yeah, but no, what you said is true. This is actually just wallpaper behind me. They're not real books, but I do read.
It's better than me. All mine are still in boxes. I'll get them up on these shelves here soon enough. The next time we talk, you'll see them. So you know, I love that the fascination with history and that like your devotion to the truth because as I was moving through your book, I was like, all right, he's got a spotlight here. You just articulated arrogance, bullying, greed, all that. Like that lens for understanding our history was super powerful for me. I was like, wow, like I just got like 9 spotlights I didn't have before, and I could place it in time and space with what we did and what the consequences of that were. Um, because it is hard to follow the history of the United States because there's no neat narrative. There's no like, and then we did this and we learned that lesson, and then we did this and we learned that. No, it's just like greatness, shadow, greatness, shadow, greatness, shadow, greatness, shadow.
And then we
Uh,
did this, and we didn't learn that lesson on many
and
occasions.
we did it again. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. It's nuts. So we're in an election year, right? Well, who knows when people are going to listen and watch this, but as of today, it's the 22nd of May, 2024. Um, and lots of folks might be either willfully ignoring that, the news cycle, the impending doom of November. I mean, it's going to be terrible either way. Like it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
And some folks might be like, like a gerbil on a wheel, just like can't wait to get the next little piece from the trial and this and that. But like, why should they spend time going into the depths of our shadow? Like why should they read this book? Like, how does this book serve American citizens, voters? Like, um, why?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And so the idea of shadow, again, we're using that word in the Jungian sense for anybody listening. It means that which we don't know about ourselves, that which an individual, an organization, or even a nation denies about itself. And if accused of whatever the shadow is, would vehemently deny it and be telling the truth in many cases. In other words, if you know it's true and you really are ignorant or arrogant and you deny it, that's not shadow. If you know it's there, it's not shadow. So learning about the shadow of the nation is important because by definition, we want to recognize shadow, understand it, own it, and then integrate it. So it's no longer denied. Oh yeah, I can be irresponsible. I've been arrogant. Doesn't mean I'm always an arrogant person. Violence is a slightly different one. Not everybody has been violent, but everybody has been ignorant or arrogant. Maybe not
Mhm.
Thich Nhat Hanh, but God rest his soul. But what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, what I think tens of millions of Americans would like to be part of trying to do, is move the nation toward wholeness
Mm.
and healing, especially healing the shadow, is about coming to terms with what is, what's true, not what's convenient, not what's easy, not what my favorite performance news celebrity says. All right, because there are journalists and then there are performance news celebrities on both sides of the allegedly objective news organizations. Um, but to really do the work to get to the heart of what's true, because that's the only way any individual, any organization, and a nation can, in fact, become whole, or at least be
Mhm.
constantly moving increasingly more toward wholeness, which is probably a more realistic way to say it. Um, I rely on, I don't know, I don't count them, but I relied on the scholars who have written about women's studies, indigenous people studies, African American studies of Vietnam War, the post 9/11 wars on terror and other, and then
Mhm.
human development scholars. So it's not me making stuff up,
Right.
um, but I'm a lot closer to being whole as a human being on May 22nd, 2024, than I was in you know 1974 or pick another year. So it's that idea of moving, of constantly healing and moving towards wholeness. That's the best reason. Healing is coming to terms with things as they are, meaning what is, what's true. And if we don't identify, own, and integrate shadow, we will not be whole.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that sounded a
Well,
little bit like teaching there. I apologize for that.
no, that's all. It's
Yeah.
hey, if you're a teacher.
Oops.
um, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I want to answer that question as well because
Yeah.
I think people should read this book. Um, because in some sense uh it it is the battlefield, not like political battlefield, um, but like what's really happening. Because left and right, they're all denying shadow. Like nobody's taking it.
Right.
Very few people are taking any responsibility for it. And something kind of implicit in what you've shared is like the line of good and evil goes through every human heart, every conversation, every relationship. Like none of us are like entirely good, or nor entirely evil. I mean, I say this to people all the time. Like, I'll bet if I had some time with Donald Trump in something, I could find something good in his heart. I'll bet. I'll bet. I know it's in there. I know it's in there. Um, and like like people, voters, you can read about your own inner work. There's tens of thousands of books. I mean, Reggie's got most of them behind him, right? Like about the individual journey. The thing is, there's never been a single human in the history of humanity. We are connected. We are part of groups, collectives, and now we're in bed with like 330 million other human beings. This is kind of like the family history that we only find out about after we get our aunts and uncles drunk. Like like this is like this is really what went down. This is like really what's happening at the like internal psychic, soulful, shadow level. Um, so my invitation to anyone who's, wants is thinking about a vote, wants to be well informed on a vote, wants to just be, you know, intimately related with what it means to be, to live here, whether you're citizen, visitor, on your way. Um, this is how you get to know what it means to be a part of this family history, because this is not the stuff you're going to see on the wall in the foyer. You're gonna have to get get the grandparents drunk to hear this.
Yeah, and I wanted to give a shout out to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was responsible for that line about the line of the thread of good and evil goes through every human heart. So that wasn't and any of the scholars out there know where that came from. So he's cited in the book. I don't want anyone to think that I came up with that.
Yeah, yeah, or me for that matter.
Yeah.
Um, so you've got this artifact, this invitation,
Mm.
um, and if folks are crazy enough, brave enough, curious enough to do it, or to read it, like what should they do next? And I know that you just came out of teaching a program at the Osher Center on this, but like if you could share a little bit about like what you would love folks to take away from this, like what they should do as soon as they put turn the last page, and then also a little bit about like what it was like to have these people wrestle with it in real time.
Yeah, so just a quick note about the Osher, known as OLLI, OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, is a it's present on about 125 universities around the country, and it's designed for lifelong learning for people over 50. So I just finished doing a 10-week class there on healing America's narratives. Great group. Ranges. I don't know who the youngest one was. I know it wasn't me, but from 50s we had a couple people over 80 who were sharp and tuned in, which was really good for youngsters like myself to see. So studying in that way, engaging with groups of people in collective learning, that's great. But finishing the book, I mean, the last two chapters of the book, chapter 11 of 12 is entitled "So Now What?" Right. So I define all the problems for 10 chapters. I get, people who make it through that. I'm really happy that they do. And then legitimate question. All right. So some problems out there. So now what? And to summarize the so now what, I'm a firm believer in intentional practice. In other words, I want to get better at something. And it can be applied to shooting a jump shot and playing the piano, not what we're talking about. Nothing wrong with either of those.
Mhm.
But I want to be increasingly more empathic. I want to be increasingly better able to understand opposing viewpoints. I want to be increasingly, I like to say, more fully human. Um, so there's an invitation to practice um, at the end of the book, and in some detail, and some sentences and some questions to explore, like who am I really? What's my impact? Everything is a story. The kicker for a lot of people is I'm going to die. That's a statement that's fairly stark and real. And learning how to practice. And there's some instruction there towards the end. But I think that's the essence. And I have a bias towards adult development.
Mhm.
And I say adult specifically, I mean human development in general, but especially adults, because if we're more or less well loved and fed through our first 18 to 22 years, we kind of develop.
Mhm.
Like, the natural world does that. We grow physically, our brains grow, and people think that used to think it stopped at about 22 years old, and we now know it doesn't. We can continue developing and taking increasingly more complex perspectives. So I encourage people to take increasingly more complex perspectives. What is it that you firmly believe but can't prove is true, and begin to interrogate it or that?
Mhm.
And do it in a way that's kind to yourself, and don't do it to your family members and friends first. In other words, if you're going to practice and you
Mm.
want to become more fully human, and you learn something from Healing America's Narratives or from
Mhm.
Bison medicine or for some other volume, don't wield it as a hammer and look at your friends, families, and neighbors as nails that you need to hit. Do your own work first. And you never finish your own work, but just get settled enough and comfortable enough in your own skin, so you really do know what you're talking about when you choose to speak out about any issue. Um, and then one last thing I'll say is I like to divide the world up into, this is like bad practice in one way, but I mean it seriously in a light way. If I look at the nature of the country today, there are two general groups of people. And I'm only speaking about American citizens now, not
Mhm.
speaking about people who want to come to this country, not speaking about people in Europe or Asia or Africa or anywhere else, speaking about people here who are citizens. There are those who want to make sure that all citizens are included in both the American promise and in the American dream. And
Mhm.
there are those who, on a regular basis, try to exclude some American citizens. And so the easy, and I'm not a big fan of binaries, but I'm going to use this one. The easy binary here is, are you a member of the group that wants to include all American citizens as being created equal and having equal rights and freedoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are you a member of the group that's trying to limit certain American
Mhm.
citizens from exercising their freedoms and feeling fully equal to others? Um, and it, you know, I'll go to the logical conclusion. If you're trying to exclude people, then you should probably reread the Declaration of Independence and the entire Constitution,
Mhm.
and get to know history a little bit better, because you're part of the problem if you're trying to exclude people. Um, and again, we're speaking, when I say
Yeah.
people, I'm speaking about American citizens in this
Mhm.
country.
Yeah.
So that, I typically don't say it quite that starkly, but I think that's pretty true. Yeah.
I mean, I love that kind of clear choice. Um, and there aren't that many clear choices to make. And when someone like yourself, who has been studying, practicing, submitting himself to personal, spiritual, human development for a very long time, says this moment gives you these two choices. Like, are you all in for all created equal? Or is there some other apartheid state really in your heart? Like I think that's kind of an important choice that we all need to make, and it should be fairly freaking simple. But
Well,
but we don't
yeah.
get we don't get a chance to make the choice unless somebody says this is actually the choice right now. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And it's not, and I'm going to use the word just here advisedly, it's not just, it includes, but it's not just about race or just about gender or just about sexual orientation. It's about wealth, it's about poverty, it's about a lot of different issues. And if you have a sense of humor about it, you can identify either as an innie or an outie, like a belly button. Um, so when I
Yeah.
discovered that, I thought I was pretty clever. So the belly button analogy. But we have innies and we have outies on the
Mhm.
political
Mhm.
scene, and they're easy to identify.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'll just riff a little bit more. I mean, it doesn't mean that life is going to get any better if we choose all created equal, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, e pluribus unum. It just means that now, inside of that choice, we can do our work around, the shadow, all the other practices that you illuminate. But if we stay over here with the exclusionary camp, you're not going to get too many invitations to do the work to actually become more whole, healed, and integrated yourself. And not that it can't happen. It's just over here, it's like it's clear. Like here are these beautiful principles. How are we not that? What do we have to do internally, externally, politically, economically, ecologically to live that way? Um,
Yeah, both
so
inclusion and exclusion take a lot of energy. And
mhm,
one is the energy of the embrace, and the other is the energy of pushing away. They're both, neither is easy, particularly. Um, but it's a lot easier to sit on a meditation cushion or relax at the end of the day with some sense of calm and peace and equanimity if you spent the day trying to embrace people than it is if you spent the day trying to shut them down or keep them out, I think.
yeah, I mean, I've done both. I mean,
Yeah.
been a racist, sexist, homophobic Midwestern frat boy, and it takes a lot of energy to like keep telling stories and pushing
Yeah.
things away so you can stay inside your little bubble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and a lot of energy to also open your heart all the time, let it be broken. Um, so Reggie, as somebody who's attended uh, to truth for, you know, sounds like most of your adult academic professional life, and recently tended to the kind of the civic soul in a sense through history, human development. Like, how do you understand what the soul of the United States is? Like, how would you, in your words, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so I'm going to stay with that idea of a unique ecological niche, a unique place in
Hmm.
the world. And um, I don't know how Bill would hold that, because he feels that everything from a rock to a
Hmm.
human being to all the creatures in between has a soul. I don't know about if he speaks of uh, corporate or organizational entities, which a nation is an organizational entity. But to your question, um, perhaps the soul of the United States, the unique ecological niche of the United States, lies in the promise of what the founders put on paper, limited by their cultural givens. We all have cultural givens. I
Hmm.
was born in 1954. They were born in 17 whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a view of the world that they held. There's a view of the world that I was given when I was born. No human being escapes the cultural givens. But that the soul of this country, which was an invention, it didn't exist and then it did because a group of men decided to, fight against the injustices of a monarchy and create some documents that would help them avoid monarchy. As an oversimplification. But so the soul of the United States, for me, I would like to think that is in fact this place where people have both the promise and the realization of equality and freedom.
Hmm.
And the one, the many as one, the one as many, which is what the founders wrote about, despite the fact that they were, we all know, we don't have to keep on repeating it, they were limited. They
Hmm.
were writing about land-owning white Christian, not even Christian, but land-owning white men, heterosexual. We know that. Um, but using their documents in fits and starts over the last 248 years almost, we have made great progress, nowhere near being done, nowhere near full equality. But I like to think that the soul of the United States is that thing, that unique niche on the planet where, in fact, all are welcome. It's not in the absence of law. There's law and there's order to it. That's healthy. But there is a certain equality to it. And no one gets to keep someone else out who is, in fact, an American citizen. And that's what's going on right now. I mean, we're moving, you know, we're going towards the founders' greatest fear, despite alleged originalists who read the Constitution as though they think they know exactly what somebody who lived 250 years ago meant at the time. As someone with a little bit of background in literary history and literary criticism, you don't know exactly what somebody who was living that long ago actually had in their heart. Um, but we're moving closer to that monarchical, autocratic fear that they had right now. So the place where the dream and the promise can be realized, that's the soul of America. We have not ever realized it. We've never really had a free market where it was really free for anyone to participate. There's the illusion of that, but it's controlled by rent seeking and by the already wealthy.
Hmm.
Um, so now, and I'm not an economist, I shouldn't go too far down that particular rabbit hole, but we really haven't ever taken seriously the promise of America. We're taking some of it seriously because you know, we're getting closer to women's equality. We're getting closer to African Americans' equality, and um, the equality of any human being that isn't a um, Western European wealthy male. So we're doing better. not done. Um, but that's what we can be. That's the soul of this country, where
Mm.
people really can be equal, and it's work because there are people who don't want that.
Yeah. And, go back to that Solzhenitsyn quote, like there are parts of me that don't want that. Like I got to where I got because other people like me excluded, black women, gay, indigenous folks from something and just gave me all this stuff. And so, and I think that's, part of this invitation to dance with the soul is like that kind of as above, so below, as within, so without, like whatever we're seeing on the projection screen of this nation is here too.
Yeah.
And um yeah, that as much beauty as are in those founding documents and our blues and jazz and all the other kind of aspects of like American culture that are like soulfully you know um you know bright and just like, wow, we actually did something. We also have this other stuff too that's getting in the way.
Yeah.
And um to tend to the soul, to elevate it, also means we've got to keep shining a light here, so there's less and less in the shadow. And that's again why I'm so happy you did this book and gave us like our first field guide, I think, to the American shadow, so that we can keep bringing more into the light and experiencing our soul.
Yeah.
um
Thank you.
so Reggie, as we move to a close here, um I want to ask you just a couple kind of closing questions. One is, you you obviously know a lot about the individual healing path, through your own work and what you've done with coaching clients, students. Um, what's the nation's healing path look like? And then when people stop listening, watching this, what do you want them to do? You want them to go to your website? What do you want them to do next?
Yeah. So the first question, which is a nice easy one, the nation's healing path. Um, For those of you who don't know me, that was a joke. So,
Mhm.
but there were three models that I know of. One was from Scott Peck years ago. He's no longer with us. One is a current model, and Peck's was called community making. Otto Scharmer at MIT has Theory U, and Thomas Hubel, who's I believe he's Austrian. I think he lives in Israel now. But his work on collective healing and collective trauma, they all share, and I'm really dumbing them down to say this, but if you and they're all doing it collectively. So community making, Theory U, Sharma's done it with groups of people, and Hubel has done it with many groups of people as well. The first thing you need is you need to show up because you want to heal. If you don't think the nation needs to heal and you don't really want to be part of that, this isn't for you. What I'm about to say, because
Mhm.
you're not going to be part of it. But if you have the will to do some work, what all of their uh, collective processes have, what we need to do as a nation is move through a chaotic, noisy, misinformed, us against them attempt to do something good. I think we're doing that piece right now. So there's this chaotic piece to it.
Mhm.
And if you do that well enough, you enter into almost because if you're willing to heal, when you see the chaos isn't really working, you move to a place of quiet or emptiness.
Mhm.
For Sharma's work, that's at the bottom of the U, where you just,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, you let some things go. Now you're at the bottom of the U and you're going to wait and let some things come. And then through emptiness or through quiet and through the collective intention of all of the people who really want this healing, new ways of seeing, new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving emerge. And this really happens with smaller groups of people, whether it was Peck was doing community making, whether it's Sharma doing his Theory U, or Hubel's doing his collective trauma healing. Um, but that's basically it. Chaos, emptiness, integration. That's a very oversimplified shorthand, but those
Mm.
three pieces work, and will has to be behind it. They have to be
Yeah.
willing to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I would offer. Not an easy, it's neither easy nor simple,
Yeah.
but worthwhile. And there was a second question, which I've forgotten.
Um, well, before I go there, I just want to say like that resonates for me. I've spent some time with the Sharma's presencing work,
Yeah.
and have a lot of curiosity around Thomas Hubel's collective trauma integration process stuff. The last question is like, how can people engage with you, find out more about you, bring you to their community, their organization, hire you? Like, what do you want me to do next?
Yeah. So if you actually are moved by this, this conversation, you can find me on, online at reggiemarra.com or healingamericasnarratives.com. I have the mixed blessing of being very easy to find. So my enemies have a great advantage over me. Um, but reach out and have a conversation. I mean, buying and reading the book is helpful because I have to, pay for food and shelter. Um, and I'm happy to do the work. Like I love this. This is my passion. I'll be doing this for the foreseeable future. I'm much closer to my final breath than I am to my first breath at this stage of my life. And various iterations of that book and what follows it, um, which will be thematically consistent. But that's what I'm going to be doing. So again, reach out, and I'll admit that I'm increasingly less able to do pro bono work because I was a Catholic school teacher and a poet in the schools, neither of which were financially lucrative. So I do need to be paid for what I do, but I'm also pretty reasonable in terms of how I navigate that if somebody really wants to be in touch and get me to do some work.
Thank you, Reggie.
Yeah.
And for those of y'all listening, watching, take him up on it. I mean, our nation is so bereft of genuine adults, embodied souls. Bring them into your organization, help them, or hire them to help you work through your healing journey, your leadership journey. Like there aren't many Reggies out there. Reach out to 'em. Reggie,
Thank you,
thank you
Brandon.
again for everything you do, but your time today. You are tending the soul and moving the ball further down court, and I so appreciate it. Everything you do, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Brandon, and you're welcome. And also a shout out to Bison Medicine because that's what this is all integrated. All the things we're doing are
Yeah,
connected.
yeah.
So yeah, so again, thank you. It's my pleasure to always to be in conversation with you.
Likewise, Reggie. Okay. See you.
Yeah, bye.